She didn't have beauty, she didn't have status, she wasn't meant to be remembered. But one cold evening she did something no one else dared to do. She gave a bowl of soup to a man sitting alone in silence. He never told her his name. He never came through the front gate. And then one morning 4 royal officials came to her door. What they told her changed everything she thought she knew about him and about herself. Because the man she fed wasn't who she thought he was, and he hadn't come for the soup. The year was 1732. It was late winter in the southern province of the empire, where the imperial palace stretched across the hills like a sleeping dragon layered in stone, wrapped in mist, and always watching. Snow had stopped falling days ago, but the air still carried the sharp bite of frost. The stone courtyard stayed cold even after sunrise, and the kitchens, buried near the back walls of the compound, were the only places warm enough to breathe deeply. This was where the servants worked, where coal was fed into deep brick stoves and soup was stirred long before the nobles woke. It was where girls with tired hands and bent backs moved through steam, never raising their voices or their eyes. This was where she lived. Her name was Lian. She was one of the many not marked by rank, nor fortune, nor beauty. Her robe was the color of dull ash. Her shoes were soft from wear, and her face was the kind people forgot as soon as she turned away. Lian had been born inside these walls, the daughter of 2 workers who died before she was old enough to remember their voices. She stayed because there was nowhere else to go, and she worked not because anyone asked her to, but because she knew how to make herself useful. She had learned long ago that quietness was safer than charm, and usefulness lasted longer than favor. Each morning before the light reached the outer halls, Lian lit the fire in the back stove of the soup kitchen. She measured rice with steady hands, cut ginger finely, and stirred broth until it turned soft and golden. She never spoke unless spoken to. She didn't laugh loudly or dream aloud like the younger girls. She didn't wear perfume or ribbon. Still, there was something in her that watched everything, not out of suspicion but care. Lian saw what others ignored: the girl who coughed at night but told no one, the cook who drank more tea than he poured, the guard who winced every time he bent his leg. She saw, remembered, and never said a word. Because in a palace like this, even kindness had to be quiet. She first saw him on a windless night in early February. She was carrying out ash from the old stove when she noticed a man sitting near. The firewood stacked near enough to feel the heat, far enough to avoid attention. He was dressed like a servant, but not like one of theirs. His robe was dark, almost black, with sleeves too long for kitchen work. His hair was tied in a loose knot, strands falling near his cheek. His face was pale. He sat perfectly still. He didn't look up when she passed, but Lian paused. She could tell by the way he held his body, not slouched, not curled, that this was no ordinary worker. He didn't seem afraid, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lifting or chopping, but from being someone he no longer wanted to be. She didn't speak. Instead, she walked back into the kitchen, ladled what was left of the night's soup into a small clay bowl, and returned. She set it on the stone near him without a word. He didn't thank her. He only looked at the bowl for a long moment, then met her eyes, then nodded. It was enough. He came again the next night, and the next, and again the night after that. He never knocked, never asked. He just sat always in the same spot, always quiet. And every night she brought him soup. Some nights she added rice. Other nights, pickled cabbage or slices of daikon. It was never much, but it was warm. And in a place where warmth was rare, that meant something. She began to notice more about him. He always arrived after the kitchen had gone still, when only the coals and silence remained. His hands were clean, but his sleeves worn. His shoes were not the kind servants wore, too well made, too carefully stitched. He watched her work sometimes, not in a way that made her nervous, but like someone who had not seen gentleness in a long time. And still, he never spoke. But Lian began to sense that he didn't come for the soup. He came for the space, the quiet. And maybe, though she never dared say it aloud for her, The others in the kitchen began to notice her late hours. They joked, whispered. One girl asked if Lian had a secret lover. She smiled softly, said nothing. What would she even say? That a quiet man in the shadows accepted her soup like it was treasure? That she waited all day to see if he would return? She didn't understand it herself. All she knew was that when he looked at her, he didn't see someone plain. He didn't see someone forgettable. He saw her, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. Days blurred into weeks, and still, he came, always at dusk or just after the hour when lanterns began to glow and the palace fell into a rhythm of whispers. The servants who worked the daylight hours retired to their corners, and the women in the main kitchens lowered their voices to gossip or complain. But Lian stayed behind as she always did now. The bowl was always ready, not fancy, never full, but warm. She no longer had to look for him. By the time the soup was poured, he would already be there, seated near the firewood stack, just out of reach of the smoke, where the glow of the embers lit one side of his face. He never smiled, but his eyes would meet hers for just a second. When she placed the bowl down, that was enough. She didn't know his name, didn't ask, because whatever this quiet thing was between them, she feared naming it would cause it to vanish. It had no shape, no promise, no beginning. But it filled her chest with something soft, and she had nothing else like it in her world. One evening, she brought an extra steamed bun. It wasn't much, just one she had hidden before the others grabbed what was left, but she wrapped it in cloth and placed it beside the bowl as if it were something precious. He paused when he saw it, then slowly reached out, picking it up with care. There was something different in the way he held it. Not like food, but like memory. He didn't look at her, not this time. But she saw the way his shoulders shifted, the way he sat a little straighter, breathed a little deeper. It was the first time she realized he might be as unsure of this as she was, and that made her feel less alone. She began to notice details about him, quiet things. The small scar near his right wrist, the way he rubbed the inside of his thumb with his forefinger when lost in thought, how he always sat with his back to the wall, never to the open path. She noticed how his robe, though plain, was made from fine cloth beneath the dust, how his hands were too smooth for labor, how he never flinched when a guard's footsteps echoed nearby. Whoever he was no kitchen boy, but he didn't act like a noble either. There was no pride in him. Only silence. One night, he came. Later than usual. The kitchen had cooled. The coals were nearly out. Lian had waited longer than she meant to. Bowl already growing cold in her lap. She almost gave up. But then he appeared out of breath, cloak slightly damp, a thin trail of mud along his hem. She stood quickly, set the bowl on the stone slab, and stepped back. He paused before reaching it, then looked at her, really looked. And this time, something in his eyes changed. It was not just recognition. It was hesitation, as if he were about to say something, and then chose not to. But before turning away, he reached into the fold of his robe and placed something beside the bowl. A folded square of parchment. No seal, no mark, just paper, tied with a single black thread. He didn't wait to see if she'd take it. He walked, off into the shadows, quieter than the wind. Lian waited until he was gone before picking it up. She turned it over in her hands, then tucked it into her sleeve without opening it. She didn't read it that night. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her fingers resting on the curve of the folded note beneath her robe. It felt warm against her skin, and terrifying. The next day, he didn't come, nor the day after or the day after that. Lian told herself it didn't matter. She had known nothing about him. He owed her nothing. He had never even spoken, but the silence that followed his absence was different now. It was not peaceful. It was sharp. The corner near the firewood seemed too empty. The soup she had once prepared with care went untouched. She found herself staring toward the alley behind the kitchens, listening for footsteps that never came. And the folded note remained in her sleeve, unopened, as if reading it would confirm that he was truly gone. But on the fourth morning, She woke before dawn and sat at the edge of her mat. The kitchen was still. Outside, the courtyard was washed in mist. She pulled the note from her robe and slowly untied the thread. Inside, only one line was written: "I remember your eyes." Nothing else. No name, no promise. Just that. And yet, it made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain, because he hadn't said he remembered her kindness, or her food, or even her face. He remembered her eyes, the one part of her she could never hide, the one thing she hadn't offered but had given all the same. That day, the soup boiled as usual, but Lian stirred it more slowly, and when she ladled out a bowl that night, she placed a second steamed bun beside it in case he came. Just in case, because even if he didn't return, she would be ready if he did. The bowl remained untouched. 2 days passed and still no sign of him. Each night, Lian placed the same bowl in the same spot by the firewood stack. She would wait, quietly, pretending to sweep, pretending to organize jars that had already been aligned a dozen times. But he did not return. She told herself it was nothing. Perhaps he had been reassigned. Perhaps he had fallen ill. Perhaps he had never meant to stay. And yet she found herself more distracted with each passing day. The kitchen felt louder. The clatter of ladles, the harsh scrape of iron pots, everything sounded sharper, as if the room had lost its softness. The other workers noticed her silence. She had always been quiet, but now she was distant. Her hands moved as before, but her gaze drifted. Once she poured water into an empty bowl without realizing. Another time she forgot to season the morning rice entirely. Mistakes were not like her, not the Lian they knew. It was the 5th night since his disappearance when the cook fire refused to stay lit. The wind outside had picked up, but the kitchen was built to shield against drafts. Still, no matter how much she fed the flame, it kept dying out. Smoke curled unnaturally, thick and low to the floor, stinging her eyes. She knelt before the stove, fanning it with a piece of folded parchment, until suddenly, as if a breath moved through the room, the fire roared to life on its own. Lian stumbled back, coughing softly, and there, beside the firewood, sat a folded bundle wrapped in cloth. She hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there. She was sure of it. Her heart began to race. Hands trembling, she unwrapped the cloth. Inside, a small bundle of dried lotus petals. Not food, not money, but something symbolic. She had seen noblewomen receive lotus petals pressed between letters of affection, tokens of quiet devotion, things that could not be spoken aloud. And tucked beneath the petals, a second piece of parchment. "Don't wait for me near the kitchen. I'll find you when it's safe." Safe? The word echoed in her mind. Safe from what? Was he in danger? Was she? Lian folded the note carefully and hid it inside the lining of her sleeve. She said nothing, but that night she did not sleep. The next day she kept her eyes open, and for the first time she noticed something strange. 2 men she didn't recognize stood outside the outer kitchen. Not guards, not dressed for labor, too clean, too alert. They weren't watching the entrance. They were watching the workers. They were watching her. Whenever she turned her back, she felt the weight of their stares. She kept her head low, her movements slower. Her heart beat too fast. Every smile from the other cooks, every sound of footsteps behind her made her flinch. Something had changed, and she didn't know why. By evening, the men were gone. But the feeling remained, that she had stepped beyond the line without knowing it, that something had shifted in the palace's quiet rhythm, and she had no idea which way it would turn. She returned to her quarters earlier than usual, avoiding the back path. She kept her robe folded tightly around her, double-checked the latch on her door, and lay still beneath her thin blanket, listening for anything out of place. The walls creaked like old bones. A dog barked in the distance, and then footsteps. Not many, just 4. Soft, slow, synchronized. They stopped directly outside her door. She sat up, eyes wide, hands clutching the blanket like a shield. A knock, not loud, not aggressive, but official. She didn't answer right away. She rose slowly, feet bare against the cold floor, and crossed to the door. When she opened it, she saw them. 4 men dressed in dark blue robes, each wearing the insignia of the royal household embroidered in silver thread. Not soldiers, not cooks, not common. Royal messengers. The tallest among them bowed slightly. "Lian," he said. Not asked. Said. She nodded, unsure how he knew her name. "You are to come with us now." She hesitated. "What?" Her voice cracked. "What have I done?" The man didn't answer. He only stepped aside and gestured toward the corridor. The other 3 remained still as stone. Lian glanced behind her once as if the room might tell her what to do. Then she stepped outside and followed them. She didn't pack anything. She didn't ask where they were going. She only walked, heart pounding, feet numb, wondering what a quiet bowl of soup had started and whether it had already gone too far. The palace at night was a different world. Gone were the clangs of metal pots, the barking of orders, the hurried steps of servants trying not to be late. In their place were stone hallways that breathed silence. Paper lanterns glowed faintly on every corner, casting soft gold over white walls and polished floors. Lian had never walked this far. The kitchen was at the palace's edge, the part no one visited unless they were hungry or angry. But now she was deep inside the heart of it. Past carved pillars, past red lacquered doors, past guards who stood like statues but noticed everything. The 4 men who led her said nothing. They didn't push or pull her, but their presence made refusal impossible. At each corner, another set of guards nodded to them. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free either. They stopped before a quiet room behind an inner courtyard. The tallest of the officials opened the door and stepped aside. Lian hesitated, then entered. The door closed behind her without a sound. She was alone. The room was warm. A brazier burned low in one corner. The floors were wood, smooth and clean. No stone, no soot, no damp air. Silk curtains hung from the beams, fluttering slightly even though the windows were shut. She didn't recognize the furniture. Not a kitchen bench, not a shared mat on the floor, but an actual bed, one that sat above the ground with soft blankets and carved posts. There were robes folded on a cedar chest, a basin with rosewater, a mirror with a frame made of gold. It was too much, too still, too fine. This was not a servant's room, not even a high-ranking one. This was a room for someone who had been chosen. Lian stood there for a long time, not touching anything. She was afraid to breathe too deeply, afraid that even one wrong step would expose her for what she truly was, a kitchen girl who didn't belong among silk and sandalwood. Then a door opened. Not the one she came through, but the one behind the curtain. She turned, heart catching. And there he was, the man she had fed, but not as she remembered him. His robe was no longer plain. It was midnight blue, edged in pale gold thread, embroidered with delicate cranes and waves. His hair was tied tightly, smooth and high, with a silver ornament that shimmered in the lantern light. His posture was tall, composed, unmistakably noble. He wasn't hiding now. He wasn't silent. He was exactly where he belonged. And she realized all at once what she should have seen from the beginning. He wasn't a servant. He never had been. He was a prince. She didn't speak, didn't bow. She couldn't move. He approached slowly, and for the first time he broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, voice soft but steady. "I should have told you sooner." Lian blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. He stopped a few steps away. "I didn't mean to deceive you, I just needed space to breathe, and you were the first person who ever gave it to me." She still couldn't speak. He smiled faintly, not the smile of a royal addressing someone beneath him, but something smaller, something unsure. "I know this is confusing. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I needed you to know I never sat by your fire because I pitied you. I sat there because it was the only place in the palace I ever felt human." Lian lowered her gaze. The air in the room had shifted. The warmth no longer comforted her. It pressed against her skin like a weight. This wasn't a quiet moment behind the kitchen anymore. This was power, and she had no idea what it wanted from her. "I don't understand," she whispered finally. He nodded. "I didn't expect you to, but I needed you to hear it from me before the court decided what version of the story to tell." He paused, then added, "You're not in trouble, no one will harm you, but things will change." She looked up, her voice steadier now. "Why me?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because you never asked who I was. You never wanted anything from me. And in a world where everyone reaches out with empty hands, you were the only one who gave first." Lian didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. And he let the silence settle between them like before. Only now, it didn't feel like stillness. It felt like a beginning. She had never seen a man so powerful look so tired. He wasn't tired like the kitchen boys after lifting heavy pots or the old cook after a long night. His tiredness was quiet, carved into the shadows beneath his eyes, buried deep in the way he held his shoulders like someone who had carried too much for too long. He didn't sit. He simply stood across from her, looking not like a prince, but like the man who had once sat on cold stone and waited for a bowl of soup he never asked for. "I never meant to be found," he said at last. His voice, though gentle, filled the space. "I was born as Prince Kai, seventh son. That means I have influence but no throne. I am useful but not protected." Lian listened, still silent, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She felt small in this beautiful room, her feet still calloused, her robe plain, her hair still tied with the same green ribbon from the kitchens. But he didn't look at her like she was out of place. He looked at her like she belonged. "I left the inner court 3 months ago," he continued. "There was a council meeting, arguments, greed in every corner of the room. Men who smiled at each other while hiding knives behind their backs. I realized..." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't want to become like them." Lian's brow furrowed. She still wasn't sure what he wanted from her. An apology, understanding, forgiveness. He didn't wait for her to speak. "I shaved the seal from my ring, wore the plainest robe I had, took a name, no, one questioned, and wandered the palace like a servant. For weeks I slept behind storerooms and listened to people speak freely for the first time in my life." His voice softened. "But no one ever noticed me. Not really. They saw a shadow and passed by. They saw a bowl and took it. They saw my silence and assumed it meant nothing." Then he looked at her. "But you didn't." Lian looked down, unsure what to do with those words. It had been so simple to her. He had looked cold. He had looked tired. She had soup, so she gave it. She hadn't expected anything in return, not even a name, especially not a crown. "I'm not special," she said quietly. Kai smiled gently. "That's what made you different. You didn't try to be. And yet, I remembered you." He moved closer now, not threatening, but careful. Like a man approaching, a wild bird he didn't want to startle. "I had planned to return to court in silence, slip back into robes with embroidery, let them say I had gone to study scrolls in the mountains or pray in solitude. But then..." His voice slowed. "I realized I didn't want to go back to being unseen." He paused, then said it plainly. "I didn't want to forget you." Lian's heart beat faster. She looked up at him now, searching his face, still trying to see the man from the kitchen beneath the prince. But the truth was, they were the same. Only now he wasn't hiding, and she wasn't invisible. "I know this isn't what you expected," he continued. "You were just kind, that's all. You didn't ask for anything. But kindness, real kindness, changes people." He took a breath. "You changed me." Lian didn't know what to say. So instead, she asked the only question that had been burning in her chest since the moment the guards arrived. "What happens now?" Kai's expression shifted, not to sadness, but something softer. Something like hesitation. That depends on what you want. She blinked. Me? He nodded. I have already given my answer. I left the court to find truth. I found it in a bowl of soup and in the woman who gave it. But I won't take what you don't freely give. Silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't fear that made her pause. It was weight, the weight of being seen, truly seen. And not because she was beautiful, not because she had power, but because she had been good when no one else had thought it mattered. He didn't press her, didn't move closer. He only bowed his head, not like a prince acknowledging a servant, but like a man acknowledging someone who had saved him. I'll leave you to rest tonight, he said softly. This room is yours. For as long as you need it. Tomorrow, we'll talk again. Then he turned, robes whispering as he moved, and disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Lian standing in the quietest place she had ever known, wrapped in silence, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in the impossible. She hadn't asked for any of this, but perhaps some things find you when you give without asking. And maybe, just maybe, the world had turned toward her. At last. The morning came quietly. Soft light spilled through the tall windows, filtered through silk curtains the color of tea. Outside, the sound of bamboo leaves brushing against the wall whispered. Like a secret, for the first time in her life, Lian had slept on a bed. Not a shared mat, not the floor beside a stove. A bed. She woke slowly, unsure at first where she was. Then it all returned. The guards, the room, the truth. Prince Kai. She sat up, pulling, the robe around her tightly, her heart caught between disbelief and dread. She didn't belong here. No matter what he said, no matter how kindly he spoke, she was not someone meant to live near gold-painted screens and silk robes. She was a kitchen girl. A girl with soot under her nails, with hands that remembered the shape of iron ladles better than fans or flowers. What could he possibly want with someone like her? A soft knock came from the other side of the curtain, not the door the side where he had left. "May I come in?" His voice was calm, familiar. She stood quickly, smoothing her hair, adjusting the fabric at her wrists. Yes. Kai entered quietly, dressed in another robe, still fine, still elegant, but simpler than before. He had tied his hair with a plain band, and he carried nothing but a small tray with 2 cups of tea. He set it down between them, not assuming she'd take any. Then he sat, not on the bed, on the mat across from her, like before, back by the firewood, like it had always been. "I know this is too much," he said gently. She didn't answer. Not yet. He poured tea, the fragrance soft and calming. "I brought you here because I didn't want anyone else telling your story before you had a chance to live it." That made her look up. He met her eyes. "You may not realize it," he said, "but people are already talking." She felt her stomach twist. He nodded, reading her fear. "They're wondering who you are, what you did, why 4 officials came to a servant's door in the early morning. Some are saying you're dangerous, others that you're favored, but none of them know the truth." He lifted the cup but didn't drink. "The truth is, you were kind when no one was watching. You gave when you had little. You spoke to me with your silence, and when I thought I had been emptied by this palace, you reminded me what it meant to be full." Lian closed her eyes for a moment. "I didn't mean to be seen," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why I saw you." They sat like that for a while, neither in a rush. Time in the palace often moved under. Pressure bells, orders, footsteps echoing down halls, but here it softened. Bent around them, she looked down at her hands. "I'm not what people expect." "I hope not," he said, smiling. That made her laugh, short and unsure, but real. She hadn't laughed in days. "You don't owe me anything," he continued. "You don't have to accept this room, or drink this tea, or stay another night. I asked the officials to bring you because I needed to show you that your kindness mattered, that you mattered. The rest is your choice." Her voice came out small but steady. "I don't know how to be anything else." He leaned forward slightly. Then don't be. Just be who you were behind the stove. The girl who made soup. Too carefully. Who noticed the man no one else saw. The wind moved outside again, carrying the scent of plum blossoms through the small window. She looked at him, then really looked. Not as the man she had fed. Not as the prince he now clearly was, but as both. As someone who had wandered into her quiet world and left something behind. And now was offering her a place in his. Not as a reward, but as a beginning. I'll need time, she said softly. Kai nodded. I'll wait. He left again, without ceremony. And for the first time in her life, Lian didn't feel like a servant who had wandered too far into the palace. She felt like herself, seen, known, and for the first time, not alone. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach the rest of the palace. By the second morning, servants began glancing sideways when Lian passed. She wasn't dressed like a noble, but she no longer moved among the workers. And that alone was enough. They called her the kitchen ghost, the prince's shadow, the quiet bowl girl. No one asked her name. They only watched and waited for her to fall. Kai had warned her. He never promised protection from gossip, only truth. But even he couldn't control the current of palace eyes sharp as glass, soft as silk. Still, Lian didn't return to the kitchens, not because she was forbidden, but because she knew she couldn't go back and pretend nothing had changed. Because something had. She had. The third day she was summoned. Not by Kai, by the Empress Dowager, the most powerful woman in the palace. Lian was led to a small court garden where white stones formed elegant paths beneath a flowering magnolia tree. The sky was pale. The petals fell like snow. And on a carved wooden bench sat the woman everyone feared, dressed in robes of silver and black, her hair like clouded ink, her fingers laced over her lap like porcelain. Lian bowed, low and careful. She didn't shake, but her heart pounded. The Empress Dowager didn't speak at first. She simply observed. "You're not beautiful," she said finally. The words cut clean and fast. "You're not trained. You're not graceful. You're not chosen, so why are you here?" Lian remained bowed. But then slowly, she stood straight. She didn't know what gave her the strength. Maybe it was Kai's voice still echoing in her mind, or the way her mother used to tell her, "Silence is not weakness unless you let it be." "I fed a man who looked hungry," she said calmly, "and he returned." The Empress Dowager tilted her head. "That's it?" "Yes." "No ambition? No plan?" "No," Lian said softly. "Just soup and a place to sit." The older woman studied her, long enough to make Lian feel bare. Then unexpectedly she smiled, but it wasn't kind, it was resigned. "I see," she said. "You're one of those." Lian didn't ask what she meant. She already knew. Those who love without asking, those who give without needing, those who cannot be bribed, bought, or broken. People like that made powerful courts uncomfortable because they couldn't be predicted or controlled. "You won't survive here," the Empress Dowager said, rising slowly. "But that's not my concern anymore." She turned, then paused. "Just know, the boy you fed has more enemies than you can count. And if he stands beside you, they become your enemies too." Lian bowed once more, but not out of fear, out of respect, because at least now everything was clear. That night she returned to her room to find Kai waiting. He sat near the window the same way he had sat behind the kitchens, legs crossed, hands still. "Was it hard?" he asked. She didn't lie. "Yes." He nodded. "She's right," he said. "This place will never make it easy." "I don't need easy," Lian answered. "Just honest." He looked at her then, with something more than admiration, with relief, and maybe even awe, because in a palace full of women trying to rise higher, here was one who simply stood still and still rose. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Unfolding it carefully, He revealed a hairpin. Silver. Simple. Shaped like a spoon. She laughed, surprised her first real laugh in days. "It's not a crown," he said, "but it suits you more." She took it gently, running her fingers over its smooth edge. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." That night she placed it in her hair. Not because she needed to be someone else, but because now she was exactly who she was meant to be. And someone rare had seen her as enough. Spring came quietly. The snow in the north melted first, then the rivers ran faster, and the palace courtyards began to fill with the scent of blooming plum trees. Red banners were hung for the new season. New names were carved into scrolls. New officials were appointed. But behind the inner walls, beyond the silken ceremony, life moved slower. There, in a room once reserved for someone far above her station, Lian now woke to sunlight and silence. She still wore simple robes. She still tied her hair with care, now held gently by the silver spoon-shaped pin Kai had given her. She still cooked small pots of soup for herself, and sometimes for him, when he came late at night, weary from council meetings or endless performances of power. He would knock softly, step in without speaking, and sit beside her while she stirred the broth. Like before, like always. Only now. Nothing was hidden. They never announced anything to the court. There was no wedding procession, no ceremony, no title carved beside her name. Kai had offered humbly, sincerely, but Lian had asked for something else. "Let me stay who I am," she had said, not out of fear, but because her love was never meant to be displayed. It was meant to be lived. So she remained without rank, but never without presence. She was seen in the gardens, sometimes writing quietly, in the kitchens where she returned occasionally to kneel beside the younger girls and show them how to fold dumplings without tearing the dough. In the archives where she helped organize scrolls no one read anymore. Wherever she walked, some whispered, but most watched, because there was something about her that could not be denied. She didn't rise by beauty. She didn't shine by charm. She endured by being, and by being true. One evening, Kai found her standing in the garden behind the archive, hands tucked into her sleeves, watching the lantern sway. He stepped beside her. She didn't turn. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I was thinking," she replied. "About?" She paused, then said, "Do you think the version of you who first sat by the firewood would still recognize the man you are now?" Kai thought for a long moment, then answered, "Only because of you." She turned, eyes soft. "Why?" "Because you saw the part of me no one else did, and that's the part I held on to." They stood in silence, watching petals fall into the dark water of the koi pond. Then he added, "And do you think the woman who gave soup to a stranger would recognize the one standing here now?" Lian smiled. "I think she'd be surprised." "Would she be proud?" "She wouldn't say it," Lian replied. "But she'd keep feeding him anyway." Kai laughed, a quiet, warm sound that echoed against the stone walls like a promise. They didn't speak of forever. They didn't need to, because love, for them, had never come from grand words. It had come from bowls of soup, from moments of stillness, from truly seeing what others overlooked. In time, the court began to forget the rumors. They found new scandals to chase, new alliances to question. But those who remembered, the morning when 4 officials walked into the servants' quarters, they never forgot what followed. They remembered a girl no one had noticed, and how she had fed a quiet man without asking his name, and how, in the end, he gave her something rarer than status. He gave her his truth, and let her remain exactly as she was. Because while the palace looked for women to dazzle, he had found someone who didn't need to shine. She only needed to stay, and she had. The end.
If this story stirred something in your heart, don't let it end here. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible until someone saw you? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that speak softly and stay with you long after they end.